Now, despite the fact that this is a YouTube channel almost exclusively focused on gear, buying more gear is not always the answer. And in fact, most guys think that staying warm is about buying better gear, but in fact, it's not just what you wear, but what you do that keeps you warm. This video is about real-world tactics that will keep you warm despite what's in your pack. Cold alone is not the problem. It's moisture, wind, energy loss, poor planning. I could go on all day. You don't beat the cold by buying a better jacket. You beat it by understanding how heat is lost and managed. So here are 10 tactics that you can employ to help you stay warm while hunting. Number 1, layer in the proper order. So this means base layer, followed by active insulation, static insulation, and then some type of wind barrier. Your base layer is gonna wick any sweat or moisture away from your body. The active insulation layer is gonna absorb that moisture and keep you warm while hiking. Then, when you stop moving and you need even more insulation, that's where the static insulation comes into play. And if we step things up one more layer and it gets windy, what happens is the wind robs that heat from the static and active insulation layers, and you kind of end up in this loop where you can't keep yourself warm. So that's when you need to put on a wind layer. For me, 90% of the time, that's my rain jacket. Now, in extreme situations, I think we can also employ a vapor barrier. A really good example of this is on your feet in extremely cold conditions. Now, what vapor barriers do is they help keep your insulation layer dry. They reduce evaporative heat loss. Now, what I mean by that is when you sweat and then that sweat evaporates off your body, that is you losing heat. So if you can use a vapor barrier to stop that process, you will conserve more heat. Now, finally, vapor barriers are not always comfortable. Quite often they can feel clammy, but in extreme cold, they can make the difference between staying warm and getting hypothermia. Number 2, manage moisture from sweat. Now this goes in both directions. So I have a little saying I like to use, which is hike cold and glass sweaty. So if you're leaving your tent in the morning or you're leaving the truck and you're just hitting the trailhead, you should always be cold, because once you've been hiking for 10 or 15 minutes, you're gonna build up body heat and you're gonna start to sweat. And if you feel warm and cozy when you leave the trailhead, by the time you've hiked 10 or 15 minutes, you're already gonna start to sweat out your layers. The opposite is true when you get to a glassing location. Because when you get to a glassing location and you're all sweaty from the hike, your natural instinct is to leave your puffy jacket off, thinking that you wanna let that moisture evaporate before you put your puffy on. That is the complete opposite of what you should actually be doing. So as soon as you get to your glassing knob, even if it feels clammy and gross, I want you to put on all the layers you have, because you need to cook the system dry from the inside out. And in order to do that, you need as much body temperature as possible to force that moisture out through all your layers of insulation, and then it can evaporate once it hits the air. If you wait until you're cooled down, you're gonna have a much harder time doing that when you put your puffy jacket on. Number 3, don't stop for too long. Another way I like to think about this is don't dig yourself a hole that you can't get out of. So I've mentioned this a ton. I was a forestry engineer for 15 years. I used to work in northern British Columbia. Minus 35 Celsius was our shutdown temperature, which means anything warmer than minus 35, which is minus 34, we went out and worked in the field all day. Take a snowmobile to work and literally hike around in the mountains for 10 hours a day doing various forestry related tasks. Not in a vehicle, not in heavy equipment, on snowshoes, walking. And most times, all I wore was a heavy base layer and my Stanny, which is like a Stanfield sweater. It's this like old school wool logging sweater. And because I was walking all day, I didn't have to worry too much about my temperature. The problem was though, when you went to have lunch, if you just stopped for 10 or 15 minutes and then got up and kept moving again, you would be fine. But if you took one of those like half an hour, 45-minute breaks, you would get dangerously cold to the point where your hands wouldn't work anymore. You'd have problems zipping things up and getting into your pockets and using your phone or taking measurements on the devices that we were using. And so yeah, You cannot stop for too long because once your body temperature gets below a certain point, no matter what you do, it's hard to get it back up into an acceptable range. Number 4, fuel the furnace. Food equals heat. When you eat food and your body breaks it down, there's a thermic effect and it raises your body temperature. Now, oddly enough, protein is the most thermic of all the macros in that it creates the most body heat. However, it takes so long to digest, it's not the optimal fuel. What is? Fat. So I like to think fat bombs for fuel. So if you're taking a break or you get to your glassing knob and you can have a high fat snack, as your body processes that fat, it's gonna warm you up. Another great tip is to have a big snack or meal that's high fat and high protein right before bed. A lot of times once you get to sleep, you can stay asleep, but getting to sleep can be a problem. So if you have that high fat snack right before bed, and I mean you're already in your sleeping bag, beanie is on, you're tucked in, ready to go, smash a big fat snack, then as you pass out, that's gonna warm up your body. You're gonna get to sleep and stay asleep much better. Number 5, block wind ruthlessly. Wind is your enemy when you're trying to stay warm. Now, we already talked about layering and having a wind protective shell, but we can think about this in the macro, because even where you stand, where you sit, the type of things that you're close to can have an effect on how warm you're able to stay. And so even if you're just putting your pack behind you, if the wind is blowing behind you, or you could build a little wall out of some debris, or if you're with a buddy, you can put both of your packs up in whatever direction the wind is facing, or try and look for little cubbies that you can get out of the wind wherever you're glassing from. So take a few minutes and think about it. When you get to a spot where you're gonna stop, what can I do to minimize the effect that wind is gonna have me? Because wind is basically coming along, you are working so hard to have your body generate heat, and then as soon as it gets slightly displaced from your body, if the wind rips it away, you're right back at square one trying to generate that heat over again. So do whatever you can to block that wind. Number 6, insulate from the ground or the air. So ground removes heat 5 times faster than air. So if you're gonna sit on the ground, lay on the ground, anything, you want to have some type of insulation layer between you and the ground. Most oftentimes, this is gonna be a glassing pad, but you can use whatever you have. Sit on your pack. You could even take some branches, break a bunch of branches, create a nice little kind of puffy layer and sit on that instead of directly on the ground. Because again, that's just gonna suck all the heat straight from your body. Another way this tip manifests itself that most people don't think about is when you're standing. If you're gonna be standing somewhere for a long period of time and you are standing on the ground, try and put something between your feet and the ground. This is gonna help your feet stay much warmer because the ground isn't sucking that heat out the bottom of your boots. Another way to think about that is if you're sitting in a stand, always put something, lots of stands are just basically a metal grate, and the cold can just suck that heat right out of the bottom of your feet. I've used pieces of rug, I've used my glassing pads, I've even put my puffy jacket down and then put my feet on top of it. But again, you want something between the bottom of your body, whether that's your feet, your ass, your back, and the ground or air so that it doesn't sap that heat from your body. Number 7, use your body heat to dry your clothes. The most obvious example of that is your sleep system. And again, we're gonna go to this concept of cooking yourself dry. So if you have a solid sleep system, no matter how wet you are, you can get into that sleep system and your body heat will force that moisture out of your clothing and then out of your sleep system, and you'll wake up in the morning nice and dry. However, this doesn't just work with your sleep system. You can also use it with your puffy jacket. You can dry out some of your base layers inside your puffy jacket, kind of tucked in your armpit. You can take your gloves off, put them underneath your armpits in your puffy jacket. You can even take your socks and stuff them in the pockets of your puffy jacket during the day, and the body heat will force the moisture out of those pieces of apparel throughout the day. And the last tip that I don't see a lot of people taking advantage of, do not take your boots off until the very last minute. Because if you have any type of moisture in those boots, the longer you keep your warm feet in those boots, the more moisture is gonna be forced out of those boots, the drier they're gonna be the next day. Number 8, chemical warmers. Not a lot of people carry these around, but depending on where you are, the little hot hands and hot feet, the ones that have the little beads that you can shake up and they get warm, those can be phenomenal for getting some heat in your boots before you put your feet in them, getting some heat in your gloves, keeping them in your front little muff pocket, and then heating up your hands from time to time. One note with these, they need oxygen to work. I never mess with the toe ones that you just leave in your boot, because once you stuff your foot in your boot, after 15 to 20 minutes, there's not enough oxygen in your boot to actually let those things breathe and work. So instead, what I will do is crack those things open, get them piping hot, stuff them in my boots, leave them for 15 or 20 minutes, let them put some heat into my boots, and then my feet don't have to generate quite as much heat in order to keep those boots warm and hence keep my feet warm. Number 9, a hot Nalgene does wonders. First example of this is in your sleeping bag at night. So if you don't have quite warm enough of a sleeping bag, or maybe you didn't bring enough clothes and you go to bed, you're still cold, boil a liter of water, pour it in your Nalgene, and then take that Nalgene, put it by your core and go to sleep with it at night. It is gonna bring a lot of heat into that sleep system. The next example of that is in the morning. Take your Nalgene, reboil that liter of water, put it back in the Nalgene and stick it in your boots. Leave it in there for 5, 10, 15 minutes. It'll transfer the heat from the Nalgene into your boots. It will help thaw your boots and heat them up at the same time. And a second tactic for boots, every night before you go to bed, you wanna open your boots as much as possible. Pull the laces so you've got lots of lace hanging out, pull the tongue out, because once those boots freeze solid, if it's not big enough to get your foot in, you're never gonna be able to get your foot in there once they're frozen solid. Also, leave your boots inside the tent. On average, the ambient temperature inside your tent is gonna be 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the temperature outside of your tent. Like I've had water freeze outside my tent, but stay completely liquid inside of my tent. So your boots are gonna be in much better shape if you leave them in the tent than if you leave them in the vestibule. Number 10, isometric muscle contractions. I know this is gonna seem super weird, but while you're sitting in glassing or in a tree stand, if you're super cold and there's nothing else you can do about it, I want you to flex and tense large muscle groups. It could be your pecs, it could be your lats, even the biceps and triceps, but more importantly, quads, glutes. I want you to flex those muscles and keep them tensed for 30 to 60 seconds. Take a break, take a couple breaths, do it again. This generates internal heat without movement from the muscles themselves. Now, I would cycle these contractions so that you can maintain circulation and you can create heat without burning too much energy. Now, I'm always looking to over deliver, so of course, we had to have a bonus tactic. Number 11, good fire starter. I thought having a fire is kind of a little too obvious. Yes, if you're cold, starting a fire is one of the best things you can do. However, lots of times we're in environments where starting a fire is not an option. Maybe you're gonna scare off game. Maybe the wood's too wet. Maybe you're in the Alpine and there's no wood at all. However, if you can have a fire, I've been testing various fire starters over the last couple of years, and some of them, even like name brand ones that you would buy in outdoor stores, are garbage. So this year, I was on a late season elk hunt with a couple of guys. I gotta give Nick and Andrew from 10% Outdoors a shout out. Nick had these fire starters, Go Fire. You literally buy them on Amazon. They're $20 for a box of 50. These things were raging fire starters. They come in little plastic, kind of like blister packs, 2 or 3 of those on the ground, under a bunch of kindling, lights in half a second with a lighter. We had a blazing fire in 2 to 3 minutes. So take fire starter that you trust. Trioxane is another really good fire starter. So listen, the truth is you don't need to spend thousands on gear. If you understand how heat is lost and how to manage moisture, wind, movement, and fuel, you can stay pretty comfortable in brutal conditions in the gear that you already own. Did you guys find this video helpful? Do you want to see more videos like that? I would love your support in making this content and making more content. And the way you can show your support is by going to mindful-reviews.com, picking one of the subscription options, and joining the community. Also, Now that hunting season is winding down, spring bear season is just around the corner. If you want to come up to British Columbia and chase giant bears with me in the mountains, shoot me an email, jay@mindfulhunter.com. Please take a moment to engage with this content, help bump it up in the algorithm, like, comment, share, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in.